I want to discuss the criminalization of nature. This is the other part of it. So we have here the smallpox virus. And the smallpox virus is, I think it's very nasty. It's a very nasty pathogen, as we all know. And thanks to vaccination programs and public inoculation programs and scientific discovery and all that, the smallpox virus has been completely eradicated from the face of the planet. Of course, there are a few strains kept in deep freezers in the bioweapons laboratories of various governments, but basically it's not out there infecting people. I mean, and it won't be unless these governments decide that, biological warfare is somehow a good thing. So I don't think anyone would argue that the smallpox virus is something that we can pretty much eradicate it, and we should eradicate it because it's a net benefit. To do so is a net benefit to our species, and we've been able to do that. But now the same idea has been applied to various medicinal plants like opium poppy, coca, and cannabis. We have this idea that we rule nature, and we can condemn any species we want to extinction if it's inconvenient. And the governments have decided these species don't deserve to exist. So they've created programs to eradicate them completely from the face of the earth. Of course, doomed to failure, but still, that attitude is not. I mean, it's just stupid. But they have that attitude. But these plants, they can be abused. Any substance can be abused. Anything can be abused. And the answer to drug abuse is education, to teach people how to properly use these substances, not to eradicate these organisms. It's not their fault. God made them to make these alkaloids, and they made us stupid, so we, can abuse the plants. But, in other words, these are valuable medicines, and especially to the indigenous people that use them. I mean, coca, the source of cocaine, but in traditional Andean culture, it's absolutely at the center of Andean culture. It is a sacred plant. It's the whole basis of the Amazonian or the Andean cosmology. It's all about coca. So what gives the DEA the right to try to eradicate coca? I don't think it does. And but they have tried to. They started this program to develop genetically engineered pathogens that will wipe out drug plants such as coca, opium, and cannabis, pathogenic fungi, genetically developed for this. Problem is they're not that selective for these plants. They also infect crop plants, and they wipe out the food supply of local communities. And their plan, Colombia, involves the dumping of tons of herbicides on these coca and cannabis crops being grown in Colombia. Well, these are toxic chemicals. They drift onto the food crops, they contaminate the water supply, and they contaminate the people. And rates of cancer and birth defects in these communities that are exposed to this are hundreds of times greater than national averages. So in some ways, this is a tragic illustration of the effects of the war on drugs. Wars like this are not on drugs. These wars are on people. And it's people that suffer from these ridiculous government policies. So it's not about genocide. They plan a genocide of plants. What they end up with is a genocide of people, of these indigenous people. So, the government needs to understand, and I think it's getting the lesson sort of shoved into its face with recent developments with cannabis, and, memo to the head of the DEA and everybody else involved: the war on drugs is over. Drugs won. So, let's get used to it. Here's another example. Salvia divinorum. Some of you probably are familiar with this. A lot of times, businesses like this, ethnobotanical businesses, got their start selling Salvia divinorum, which is a hallucinogenic mint, comes from Mexico. It's been used for centuries in divination by the Mazatec people. And it's extremely potent, and it has very bizarre and very rapid effects when you smoke the leaves. Some of you are smiling, you know from personal experience what this is like. Now, indigenous people would never smoke the leaves. They would consider that an abomination. They chew the leaves, and they know that in their cosmology, Salvia divinorum likes water, it likes coolness, it hates flames, and so to smoke the leaves is an insult to the spirit of the plant as these people see it. Maybe yes and maybe no, but it certainly, when you smoke the leaves, it has rapid and very impressive and very bizarre effects, right? And so it's become a legal high, but it's been banned by several states now and some countries. So far, only a few states. And the DEA has identified it as a drug of concern, but they haven't banned it on the federal level. Australia has banned it on the federal level. Australia's drug laws tend to be more draconian than ours. But the problem is that when you prohibit a drug like this, you also you make it much more difficult to do research on it. And in the case of Salvia divinorum, it's an extremely interesting, the compounds from it are extremely interesting because of their properties. The main active ingredient is a diterpene called salvinorin A. And salvinorin A it's not a real psychedelic. It's not a true psychedelic, which works on serotonin receptors. It's actually the most selective and most potent drug that interacts with a class of opiate receptors called the kappa opiate receptors. There are 3 kinds of opiate receptors, mu, kappa, and delta. And kappa is the one that salvinorin A interacts with. And interestingly enough, it only interacts with that receptor. So I don't have a laser thing. But what you're looking at in this graph here, this is on the bottom axis. This is different receptors, serotonin receptors, dopamine receptors, et cetera, the opiate receptors. The red blocks in front are LSD. That's what LSD looks like if you screen it against all these different receptors. LSD is what pharmacologists call a dirty drug, meaning it's dirty in that it's not selective for only one kind of receptor, or a few kind of receptors. It hits a lot of drugs. We know that LSD mainly interacts with serotonin receptors. That's where its actions come from, but it hits dopamine receptors and, all kinds, adrenergic receptors and so on. In the back here, the green things, that's salvinorin A. It hits only the kappa receptor and basically nothing else. That's remarkable. I mean, if you were a drug designer and you wanted to use computer-aided drug design to design a synthetic kappa opiate agonist, you couldn't even get close. So ethnopharmacology trumps computer-aided drug design in this case. The person that made this discovery said, if I use computer-aided drug design to try to create a kappa opiate ligand that was that effective, that selective, it wouldn't look anything like salvinorin A. He said, this stuff looks like cholesterol. And it does. I mean, it's quite lipid and lipid soluble, but it has this effect. And it's the most potent psychoactive natural product known. It's effective around 60 or 50 or 60 micrograms. So it's right in the same category as LSD, which is not a natural product. It's a semi-synthetic natural products. A lot of interest in salvinorin A for treatment of schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, pain, and even Alzheimer's. There's a lot of excitement, and people are now developing analogs of this compound. So the work is being done, but the natural world provided the lead. So another good example here is the one that I think Herb Stomp I think it's paying for Herb Stomp, and it's mitragyne, kratom or kratom, I'm not sure how you say it, Mitragyna speciosa. This is a plant from Southeast Asia primarily, contains alkaloids like mitragyne, and it has a lot of related indole alkaloids, and the mitragyne alkaloids interact with opiate receptors. So it's kind of like opium, but people use it often to taper off opium, to taper off heroin and things like that. It's not like ibogaine, which is a psychedelic that's used to interrupt the addiction program. You can think of mitragyne as kind of a vegetable methadone in some ways. It's a less harmful, less destabilizing. I don't know is that accurate? Is that a reasonable way to characterize it? You experts here? Yeah, I mean, you can use mitragyne if you're hooked on narcotics, and a lot of people are because of the overuse of oxycodone mostly these days. So if you're hooked on oxycodone or other opiates and you don't want to be addicted, you can use kratom to taper off, and even if you don't entirely give it up, it's still less harmful. I mean, inherently, herbs are less toxic and less harmful. So it's a very useful plant. It's not particularly dangerous. There's no reason why it should not be available. It's an effective treatment for opium addiction. Why wouldn't we want that? And in fact, so far, it's still legal, but I guess the FDA has recently banned importation of kratom, and the DEA is considering prohibiting the plant and its alkaloids. And this is just stupid. It uses up resources that could be used in a better way. Kratom is basically a benign plant that's benefiting people. And so it should be available under just it's a basic human right. I believe it's a basic human right to form symbioses with any plant that we want. And that's essentially what the use of a medicinal plant is. It's a kind of symbiosis. And yeah, okay, some people get a little bit hooked on that. But it's much easier to discontinue the use of kratom than, say, oxycodone. And then the other element is, this is where education comes in. You can say, well, you want to use this. Here's the safety profile. Here's the downside. Here's the benefits. Education is far more effective in helping us come to terms with the use of these substances than prohibition does. Prohibition just doesn't work. And you think they would have learned that with alcohol, but they haven't. I don't know. But mitragyne is, and also the other thing is, just like salvinorin A is leading to the development of a bunch of semi-synthetic analogs, so is mitragyne. This is a very interesting molecule because it combines the properties of an opiate as a sedative with a stimulant. At certain doses, it's stimulative. At higher doses, it's more of a sedative. So this is another promising area for drug discovery. And really, a lot of the other alkaloids in mitragyne haven't even been looked at in terms of their pharmacology. Okay, another example here is DMT. DMT and related compounds like 5-methoxy-DMT are everywhere in nature, and yet they're controlled substances. DMT is a Schedule I controlled substance. It is not an exaggeration to say that nature is drenched in DMT. It's found in plants, it's found in fungi, it's found in animals. And the reason for that is it's a very simple compound, 2 steps from tryptophan. Tryptophan is an amino acid that's found in protein. So tryptophan is universally distributed. Every living thing has tryptophan. 2 trivial steps away from tryptophan, you get DMT. So it's not surprising that there's lots and lots of DMT around. And and in many plants. And this is just a list of the families and the genera and the compounds that they're reported to contain. And the numbers in parentheses are the number of species in that genera, in that genus. So Azioaceae, the genus Delospermum, there are 130 species. Probably all of them contain DMT. And you can just go down the list. Acacia is another in the legume family, the Fabaceae. The acacia is a notorious form of source of some of the strongest natural sources of DMT on the planet are acacias. Some of these acacias have 2% DMT makes up their biomass. And there are 1,200 species of acacia. And so they, probably half of them have DMT in them. Australia recently banned the acacias. They just banned all acacias, which is kind of silly because, yeah, right. I mean, and acacia is the national tree of Australia. So the Aussies, I love them, but they need to wise up. So this is a partial list. Here's the rest of the list. All of these plants in these families contain DMT. Pandanaceae, 600 species. Psychotria, which is Psychotria viridis, is the source of chacruna, contains DMT. There are 1,400 species of Psychotria. Probably half of them contain DMT. So if the DEA or anybody else wants to control DMT, they basically have to criminalize all of nature. I mean, I personally, knowing the chemistry of DMT and how it's biosynthesized, I personally believe that all plants contain DMT. And you could, if you applied sensitive instrumentation to them, you could find DMT in all plants because it's just a fact of biochemistry that the enzymes in cells that convert tryptophan to DMT are everywhere in nature. They're in animals, fungi, and plants. So there's DMT in all plants. Some of them happen to overexpress DMT, and those are the ones that we find useful as sacred medicines. Some of you are aware probably of recent reports. You notice the Rutaceae here, the family Rutaceae. Limonia, Vepris, Xanthoxylum, Dictyoloma. About 3 papers recently came out. The hottest, newest source of potent plant source of DMT in high levels happens to be oranges, lemons, and limes. The seeds contain high levels of DMT, 5-methoxy-DMT, and N-N-N-trimethyltryptamine. So, take that, DEA. Try and control your orange crops. It's actually possible to calculate based on the acreage of citrus cultivation in places like Florida. Knowing the levels of DMT in the seeds, you can calculate how many megatons of DMT they're producing. No, farmers don't know this, but in fact, if they did happen to know it, they might do something illegal. But of course, that would never happen. So another example is cacti. Cacti, mescaline, is not nearly as widespread in nature as DMT. It's a more complicated molecule, and the general rule is more complicated a molecule is, the farther away it is from so-called primary metabolic pathways, the rarer it will become. But mescaline is still pretty common. It occurs in the cactus family, not outside the cactus family, as far as anyone knows. But there are at least 30 species of cacti that contain mescaline. It's not just peyote and Trichocereus or San Pedro. There are 30 species. Many of these, you can just go to your local nursery and buy them. It's mescaline is a controlled substance. Cacti are not. So you can just buy, you can say, hey, man, I'm into ornamental cacti. You got a problem with that? And you can just buy those things. And for some reason, they know this, but they haven't made a great effort to prohibit these cacti. San Pedro cactus is legal I suppose if you extracted mescaline from it, or if you bought a Trichocereus at your local nursery and had the intent to isolate mescaline from it, that would be illegal. So when you go up there and they say, son, what are you going to use this cactus for? You can say, well, ornament, I have a greenhouse and ornamental cacti. Or if you're going to extract mescaline from it, you kind of look at the floor and say, nuttin', I don't know. Anyway, that's another example. Here's a molecule that's basically all over the place. So here's an example of how stupid this can get. A few years ago, there was a bill proposed in the Louisiana legislature. And that tells you right now, we're in stupid territory. Apologies to anyone from Louisiana, but I tell you, your legislators, need to have their heads examined. So they proposed this bill, which said, controlled substances prohibits the production, manufacture, and distribution of hallucinogenic plant products. An act to enact RS 40.989.1 relative to controlled dangerous substances, to create the crime of the unlawful production, manufacture, distribution, or possession of a material, compound, mixture, or preparation intended for human consumption which contains a hallucinogenic plant. Hallucinogenic plant not defined, really. It shall be unlawful for any person knowingly or intentionally to produce, manufacture, distribution, or possess with intent to produce, manufacture, or distribute a material, compound, mixture, or preparation intended for human consumption which contains a hallucinogenic plant, right? So along with this bill, they gave us a list of putative, suspected hallucinogenic plants, most of which you probably never heard of, right? And unless you're really into this stuff. And then if you are, you'll realize that this list came from a review paper on hallucinogenic plants written by Schultes. He's written many of them. But R.E. Schultes, the famous Harvard botanist and the world's expert on hallucinogenic plants, has written many reviews on hallucinogens, and usually includes a section in those reviews that talks about suspected hallucinogenic plants, plants for which we think they might be hallucinogenic based on their indigenous use. We don't know, but we suspect it. So he comes up with, and some legislator, the guy that drafted this bill, whose qualifications were nil to make any judgment on this, I believe he was a plumber. No insult to plumbers here, but But this is the list of some of the plants that they wanted to ban under this bill, and only a partial list, right? So I saw this and I got really incensed. So I wrote a letter to the Louisiana legislature, and here's some extracts from my letter. I said, as an ethnobotanist who has been studying the uses of medicinal plants for over 30 years, I am writing to urge you to withdraw your ill-considered bill currently under review by the Judiciary Committee in the Louisiana Legislature. This bill is not only unconstitutional, but also unenforceable. The bill is tantamount to an attempt to criminalize all of nature. Biologically active substances, some of which are psychoactive, permeate the biosphere, and especially the plant and fungal kingdoms. It's a fact of nature, and we might as well get used to it. Many of the plants on the list have no identified chemical markers, and in many cases, reports of their alleged psychoactivity is based on anecdotal reports of dubious reliability. Most of these plants are rare endemics native to the Amazonian rainforest, not usually encountered by North American botanists. The forensic problems alone faced by any prosecutor in establishing the botanical identity of the plants in question are daunting, requiring the expertise of teams of botanists and pharmacognosists. Needless to say, this is likely to lead to some complications when it comes to the enforcement of this provision. This bill does nothing, nor can it, nor should it, to address the potentially thousands of plant species that contain undiscovered hallucinogenic or psychoactive compounds? Are we going to preemptively prohibit all of these species as well? How will we know them when we find them? It has been estimated that only about 10% of the 250,000 known plant species have ever been investigated for their chemical constituents. It is certain that as science continues to explore plant medicines, new psychoactive compounds will be discovered. Some of them may well prove to have useful medical applications, yet this bill will discourage and in some cases prohibit research that may eventually enable such discoveries. This bill is short-sighted in the extreme and moreover is impossible to enforce, given the technical difficulties alluded to above. The legislators should find better things to do with their time than criminalizing plant species that are endemic to another continent. So here's final issues to ponder, some of which we addressed today, but not all of them. Partly one of the issues that we have to face in science is the issue of hubris. We think that science is very powerful, and it is, but we overestimate its limitations sometimes. So there's this attitude on the part of science that, we can do anything because we're scientists. No, there needs to be an ethical limit on some scientific things. Like, an extreme example of this is, for example, and I'm all for this research, but an extreme example is work that's going on with Large Hadron Collider and the discovery of the Higgs boson and all that. There is a very, very, very small but non-zero probability that by mucking around with the structure of space-time on this level, we could collapse the whole shooting match. And so instead of saying, well, maybe we shouldn't do this, because there's a really small chance, but it could happen. Instead, they say, well, in the interest of science and the discovery of knowledge, we'll go ahead and do the experiment, and so we do that. We scientists arrogate to themselves the right to do things that, may be ethically questionable in the service of the search for knowledge. I mean, I'm all for new knowledge, but I'm also for ethics. So that's a part of it. Greed is also a part of this, and that emerges from the notion that we own nature. Nature exists for us to exploit. And we know there are trillions of dollars waiting to be made by the first people that patent genes or synthetic life forms. We know that, the ultimate goal of this is to corporatize nature, to just make it another commodity that belongs to the global, corporate hegemony. And the third issue is control. It's like, if we can't patent it, we will prohibit it. If corporations can own it, then, you and you and you and me, we can't use those because we're violating patents. So they assert the right to control and prohibit all of these natural medicines that includes the psychoactive medicines and the sacred medicines. Ultimately, where this is going, and this is the slippery slope that we're on, where this is going is the state asserts the right to control consciousness itself, what we are permitted to experience. And, George Orwell in 1984 talked about the thought police. We're there, people. We are totally there. And these sacred plants, these psychoactive plants, I often tell people, think of those as our bioweapons. We can fight back, and these plants are important tools. I don't like the word weapon, but in a sense they are weapons to fight this global hegemony. It's not only a war on drugs, it's a war on consciousness. It's saying certain states of mind people should not be prohibited to have. And I think it will be very interesting in the next 10 years or so as they develop neurotechnologies that can induce altered states that probably make psychedelic states seem tame. What are they going to do with those technologies? Are they going to ban those technologies? Or many would like to, because, as we know, I think most people in this room know that, the war on drugs is really a war on people, and it's a war on ideas. The reason psychedelics are dangerous is because they give you funny ideas. They give you unconventional ideas. They enable you to question authority and wonder, what is really going on? Why do I have to aspire to work in a cubicle all my life so that I can retire and have my pension taken away? And why serve these kinds of corporate masters? So how do we use these plants, these bioweapons in this way? How can we fight back? I think the way you fight back is you do what plant people have always done. You do what they've always done. They grow gardens. They trade plants. They teach each other how to use them, how to prepare them, how to grow them. They share knowledge. Plants want to spread. That's what plants do. They need our help. That's part of the symbiotic equation, part of the symbiotic relationship. So, this revolution does not involve guns. It doesn't involve violence, none of those things. It involves trading your favorite cuttings over the back fence, teaching your neighbors how to grow them so they can teach their neighbors how to grow them. It involves emulating what we see happening with ayahuasca, as it moves out of its endemic home into the world. It got there by simply making friends with people. And people like it, they value it, and they pass it around. And now it's gone global. So if that can happen with ayahuasca in less than 40 years, probably started in the mid-70s with the first plants exported to Hawaii, we can do it with other plants. And so the answer is to form, to take your symbiosis with plants seriously. Grow them, share them, teach people how to use them in a safe way and in a way that is spiritually satisfying. And, we can't lose. In fact, we better not lose because all life on Earth depends on plants. So, we are on the right side of this. And the death culture, can be put on notice that, their days are numbered. So that's the end of my talk. Yeah, thanks. Hot in here, isn't it?
Yeah.
Should we take a break?
Yeah.
What time is it? 8:30. Huh? Yeah, let's go outside and get some air. Maybe we won't have a reading after. We'll see.